I asked her 3 times. Are you with anyone? Every time, she swore she was single. I trusted her. I loved her. I even sent money to help with her aunt's surgery. Then I got the invitation. Her name was on it, along with another man's. And the wedding was in 3 days. I'd been in the Philippines for just over a month when I met Danalyn. 54 years old, freshly divorced and burned out from 28 years of corporate life in New York. I wasn't running from anything. I was walking towards something I couldn't name yet. Peace, maybe. Purpose. A life that didn't feel like I was drowning in it every single day. The cottage I rented in Tagaytay was supposed to be my reset button. 3 months minimum, maybe longer if it felt right. The morning air up there was different. Cleaner, like it could wash away everything I'd been carrying for too long. She was the event coordinator at the resort. Always busy, always smiling, always making someone else's dream come true. Weddings, anniversaries, proposals. I'd see her rushing between the kitchen and the gardens with clipboards and flower samples, her hair pulled back, sweat on her forehead, but never losing that warm smile. She was 32, though she looked younger. Small frame, careful movements, like she was used to taking up as little space as possible. Even when she was directing the catering staff or setting up ceremony arches, she moved with this quiet efficiency that made everything look effortless. The first time I really noticed her, she was arranging white orchids for an anniversary dinner. Her hands moved like she was conducting a symphony, each flower placed with intention. I watched her for 10 minutes from my cottage porch, mesmerized by how someone could make something so beautiful look so easy. When she caught me staring, she blushed and looked away, but not before I caught her smiling. One evening I was sitting on my cottage porch, watching the sunset paint everything gold, when she walked by carrying an armful of white roses. The petals were scattered on her uniform, and she looked exhausted but somehow still graceful. I called out to her, "Do you ever get tired of making other people's dreams come true?" She stopped, turned, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I saw her really look at me. Not the polite resort smile, but something deeper. Something real. "I don't have time to dream for myself," she said, and her voice carried this quiet sadness that hit me right in the chest. That was the moment I leaned in. "What would you dream about if you had the time?" I asked. She shifted the roses in her arms, petals falling to the stone path between us. "I used to dream about traveling," she said, "seeing places where no one knows my story, where I could be anyone I wanted to be." The way she said it, with this mix of longing and resignation, made me want to show her every place I'd ever been. "Where would you go first?" She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Somewhere with snow." I've never seen snow. We started talking every night after that. She'd finish her shift around 9 and sometimes she'd walk by my cottage. I'd offer her coffee or a beer and we'd sit on the porch, talking until the cicadas got too loud to ignore. She told me her father died when she was 12. Heart attack at work, dropped dead carrying bags of cement at a construction site in Manila. Her mother remarried 2 years later, a businessman who got a job in Dubai. She chose him over me, Danalyn said one night, her voice flat. Said I could come visit during school holidays. But holidays cost money, and he had his own kids to worry about. She'd been left behind with her aunt here in Tagaytay, the woman who raised her from 14 to now. "I understand being alone," she said, and I felt something crack open in my chest. "I've been alone too," I told her. My divorce had been finalized just 4 months before I flew to Manila. 22 years of marriage, 2 kids who barely called anymore, and a wife who'd been emotionally checked out for the last 5 years of it. Sarah had stopped seeing me years before we signed the papers. I became invisible in my own house, a ghost who paid the bills and mowed the lawn but never got invited to the conversations that mattered. "Sometimes I think I forgot how to be with someone," I admitted. Danalyn reached over and touched my hand. Her fingers were small and warm, calloused from years of physical work. "Maybe we can remember together," she whispered. Then she kissed me, soft and careful, like she was asking permission with her lips. I asked her about her love life the next night. We were walking through the resort gardens after dinner, her hand in mine, and I needed to know where I stood. The path wound between flowering trees I couldn't name, their perfume heavy in the humid air. "Have you been with anyone recently?" She stopped walking and looked up at me. "Not for years," she said. "There was someone in college, but that ended badly. He promised things he couldn't deliver. Since then, it's just been work and taking care of my aunt. I've been alone too long. The way she said it, with this mix of resignation and hope, made me want to protect her from ever feeling that way again. What happened with him? I asked. The one in college? She looked away, toward the pool where colored lights danced on the water. He was from a wealthy family. Said he loved me, but when his parents found out about us, suddenly I wasn't good enough anymore. Wrong class, wrong background. He chose his inheritance over me. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. I learned not to believe promises after that. People say what they think you want to hear. I don't make promises I can't keep, I said. She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was trying to see inside my head. You're different, she said finally. Older, more settled. American men are more honest, I think. The way she said it, with such certainty, should have been a warning sign. But I was 54 and lonely and desperate to be seen as something other than the failure I felt like back home. She started coming over more often. She'd bring ingredients from the local market and cook for me. Simple meals, but everything tasted better when she made it. Adobo with pork belly that fell apart at the touch of a fork. Fried rice with tiny dried fish and vegetables cut so precisely they looked like art. Fresh mangoes cut into perfect slices, so sweet the juice ran down my chin. We'd eat on my porch and she'd tell me stories about the weddings she'd coordinated. The bridezillas, who changed their minds about flowers 3 times in one day. The grooms who showed up drunk and had to be sobered up in the kitchen. The couples who were clearly making a mistake, but wouldn't listen to reason. How do you know when it's real? I asked her one night. She was curled up against my side, her head on my shoulder, her hair smelling like the sampaguita flowers she'd been arranging that afternoon. When it feels quiet, she said. Like you can finally stop running. Like you can breathe for the first time in years. That's exactly how it felt with her. Quiet. Safe. Like I could exhale after holding my breath for decades. We'd walk around the grounds holding hands, and she'd point out flowers I'd never noticed before. Bougainvillea cascading over stone walls like purple waterfalls. Sampaguita blooming white and fragrant in the evening air. Birds of paradise that looked too exotic to be real. She knew the names of everything, their growing seasons, which ones needed more water, which ones would survive the typhoon season. My aunt taught me, she explained. She used to have the most beautiful garden before she got sick. 20 different types of roses, orchids hanging from every tree. It was like paradise. Her voice got soft when she talked about her aunt, protective and loving, in a way that made me want to take care of both of them. That's when she first mentioned the medical bills. We were lying in my bed one Tuesday morning, the sun streaming through the bamboo blinds, casting leaf-shaped shadows on her bare skin. She was tracing patterns on my chest with her fingertip, humming something I didn't recognize, when her phone rang. She answered in Tagalog, her voice getting more worried with each word. The conversation went on for 10 minutes, getting more heated, more desperate. When she hung up, she was crying. My aunt needs surgery, she said, her voice breaking. Her kidneys are failing. The doctors say it can't wait much longer if we don't do something soon. She couldn't finish the sentence, just buried her face in my neck and sobbed. I held her while she cried, her body shaking against mine, and felt something fierce and protective rise up in my chest. How much? I asked. She shook her head. I can't ask you for that. We barely know each other. It's too much money, and you've already given me so much just by being here. But she told me anyway, the number tumbling out between sobs. 200,000 pesos. About $4,000. I had it. Hell, I had 10 times that sitting in my savings account back home, money I'd been hoarding for a retirement that suddenly seemed less important than the woman crying in my arms. You don't have to, she said when I offered, but her eyes lit up with hope she couldn't hide. She gave me the bank details anyway, written in careful handwriting on resort stationery. Her aunt's full name, the account number, the bank branch. I'll pay you back, she promised. When she's better, when I can work more hours, I'll pay you back every peso. I didn't want her money. I wanted to be the man who could solve her problems, who could make her life easier, who could be worth keeping around. Sending that money felt good. It felt like love the way I'd always imagined it should be. Not desperate or needy, but solid. Protective. Like I was finally the man I'd always wanted to be. She cried when I showed her the transfer confirmation on my phone. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered against my neck. Just get better, I said. Both of you. For 2 weeks after that, everything was perfect. She'd come over after work and we'd cook together, her teaching me how to clean fish properly, how to fold lumpia without tearing the wrapper, how to know when rice is ready just by the sound it makes in the pot. We'd watch movies on my laptop, terrible American rom-coms that she loved, and I pretended to enjoy just to see her laugh. We'd make love with a tenderness I'd forgotten was possible, slow and careful and full of whispered words in 2 languages. She never asked for anything else. No jewelry, no expensive dinners, no promises about the future. She just wanted time. Time to talk, time to touch, time to exist in the same space without having to perform for anyone else. I was falling in love with her quietness, with the way she hummed while she cooked, with how she'd trace patterns on my chest while I fell asleep, with the way she'd wake up before me and make coffee, bringing it to bed so we could watch the sunrise together through my window. But then she started pulling away. Subtle at first. Fewer texts during the day. Messages that used to come every hour became every few hours, then only at night. Cancelled visits. Aunt's getting worse, she'd say. The surgery helped, but now there are complications. I have to spend more time at the hospital. Or, I have to work late. Big wedding this weekend, and the bride is driving everyone crazy. I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Love makes you stupid that way. Makes you ignore the warning signs because acknowledging them would mean admitting you might be wrong about everything. One night I called the resort around 10 p.m. I'd been waiting for her since 9, and she hadn't shown up or responded to my texts. 3 messages sent, all showing as delivered but not read. The receptionist answered, polite but confused. Danalyn? Oh, she left around 6, sir. Big smile on her face, seemed like she was in a hurry. Is everything all right? My stomach dropped. 6. She'd been gone for 4 hours, and I had no idea where. I tried calling her phone. Straight to voicemail. Hi, this is Danalyn. Leave a message and I'll call you back. Except she wouldn't call me back, not that night. When I asked her about it the next day, she snapped at me. Do you think I'm lying? Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment she looked genuinely hurt. I went to see my aunt at the hospital. The visiting hours are weird, and then I had to stop at the pharmacy to pick up her medications. Do I need to report every minute of my day to you now? Then she started crying, that broken, overwhelmed crying that makes you feel like a monster for asking questions. I'm sorry, I said, pulling her into my arms. I'm just worried about you, about us. You've been so distant lately. She melted against me, her tears soaking through my shirt. I know. I'm sorry. I'm just so stressed about my aunt, about money, about everything. You're the only good thing in my life right now. Please don't give up on me. But the doubt had crept in. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. How she never let me see her phone screen, always angling it away when she checked messages. How she'd step away to take certain calls, walking far enough that I couldn't hear what she was saying. How she'd sometimes look at me with this expression I couldn't read, like she was seeing someone else entirely, comparing me to someone I couldn't compete with. I told myself I was being paranoid. The divorce had made me suspicious of everyone, even people who deserved my trust. Danalyn wasn't my ex-wife. She was different. She was real. Are you happy? I asked her one night. We were sitting on my porch after dinner, and she seemed distracted, checking her phone every few minutes. Of course I'm happy, she said, but she didn't look at me when she said it. Why would you ask that? You just seem, I don't know, like your mind is somewhere else. She put her phone down and took my hand. My mind is here, she said, with you. I'm just worried about my aunt, that's all. The doctors say she needs more tests, more treatment. It's expensive. Another number, bigger this time. Another bank account, this one for a specialist in Manila. Another transfer, another promise to pay me back. Another night of grateful tears and desperate lovemaking. 2 weeks later, I was checking my email spam folder, looking for a booking confirmation from a hotel in Cebu where I was thinking of spending Christmas. The internet at the resort was slow, and sometimes legitimate emails ended up filtered as junk. That's when I saw it. A digital wedding invitation from some service called Wed Invite. The subject line was in Tagalog except for 2 names I recognized. Danalyn Cortez, my Danalyn. I almost deleted it automatically, but something made me click. Maybe it was boredom, maybe it was fate. Maybe I just needed to see someone else's happiness to remind myself that love actually worked for some people. The page loaded slowly on the resort Wi-Fi. First the header with decorative gold script, then the border of white roses and baby's breath, then the photo. And there she was, Danalyn, my Danalyn, wearing a white dress I'd never seen before, flowing and elegant with lace sleeves and a long train. Standing next to a man I'd never seen before, tall and handsome in a way that made my chest tighten. Both of them smiling like they'd just won the lottery, like they were the happiest people who had ever lived. Danalyn Cortez and Elvin Sebastian invite you to share in the joy of their wedding ceremony. The date was 3 days away. The location was the same resort where we'd met, where we'd fallen in love, where I'd been living for the past 2 months thinking I was building a future with her. The invitation was detailed, professionally made. A schedule of events starting with morning preparations, followed by a traditional Filipino ceremony, then a reception dinner with dancing until midnight. There were photos of both families, smiling and embracing like they'd known each other for years. There was information about accommodations for out-of-town guests, a gift registry at a department store in Manila, even a hashtag for social media posts. Danalyn and Elvin 2024. This wasn't a last-minute decision. This was planned, organized, paid for. This was real. I couldn't breathe. The air in my cottage felt thick and poisonous. I read the invitation 5 times, looking for some mistake, some explanation that would make this make sense. But there was no mistake. There was her full name, spelled correctly. There was her face, radiant with joy I'd never seen before. There was the man she was going to marry in 3 days, while I'd been sitting in my cottage like an idiot, planning how to extend my stay so we could have more time together. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through my phone, looking at our text conversations, our photos together, searching for clues I'd missed. How had I been so blind? How had I not seen this coming? Every canceled date, every mysterious phone call, every time she'd seemed distant or distracted, she hadn't been taking care of a sick aunt. She'd been planning a wedding. I don't remember walking to the staff quarters. I don't remember finding her outside the kitchen, taking a smoke break she'd told me she'd quit months ago. I just remember standing there, holding my phone out like evidence in a trial, watching her face change from confusion to recognition to something that might have been relief. "I can explain," she said, but she didn't try to. She just looked down at her cigarette and took a long drag. The smoke curled between us like a barrier, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked tired. Really tired. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "How long have you been engaged?" She didn't answer right away, just kept smoking, staring at the ground between us. "Danalyn, how long?" 2 years, she said finally. "He's been working in Dubai, construction work, good money. He comes back twice a year, sometimes 3 times if we're lucky." I felt something break inside my chest, not just my heart. Something deeper. Something that had taken me 54 years to build, and she'd demolished in 2 words. 2 years. While I'd been thinking I was special, thinking I was chosen, she'd been engaged to someone else for 2 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not shame, not regret, just calculation, like she was figuring out how much truth she could get away with. "I didn't think you'd find out," she said. "Elvin's family is from Bataan. Different province, different people. And you're American, you don't know how things work here." Each word was a knife between my ribs. "He sends money, but it's not enough. The resort doesn't pay well, and my aunt really is sick. I needed help while he was away." The casual way she said it, like I was just a temporary solution to a financial problem, made me feel sick. "I never lied about caring for you," she added, like that was supposed to make it better. That made it worse. So much worse. Caring, not loving, not choosing, just caring, the way you might care for a stray dog that shows up hungry at your door. "The money I sent," I said, "for your aunt's surgery." She nodded, still not looking at me. She really did need it. I also needed to pay for the wedding. The catering, the flowers, the dress. She gestured vaguely at her phone, where I could still see her smiling face next to his. Elvin's been saving, but Dubai money doesn't go as far as it used to. Everything's more expensive now. How much? I asked. How much of my money went to your wedding? She took another drag of her cigarette. Half, she said. Maybe a little more. The surgery was real, but it was cheaper than I told you. Public hospital, not private. And the medications, the specialist appointments, those were for the wedding planner, the photographer. Each revelation was another weight added to my chest, making it harder to breathe. So everything was a lie. She finally looked at me then. Not everything. I do care about you. You're a good man, Mitchell. Kind, generous. In another life, things might have been different. But not in this life. No, she said. Not in this life. She dropped her cigarette and crushed it under her foot. Elvin and I, we have history. We grew up together, went to school together. Our families know each other. It's not just about love, it's about fitting. About building something that makes sense. She looked at me with something that might have been pity. You could never understand that. Americans think love is enough. But it's not. Not here. Not for people like us. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my phone or storm off or make a scene. I just stood there while my hands shook and my vision blurred and everything I thought I knew about my life rearranged itself into something I didn't recognize. Did any of it mean anything to you? I asked. She was quiet for a long time, so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. It meant what it needed to mean, she said finally. I walked back to my cottage in a daze. Everything looked the same but felt different, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The porch where we'd had our first real conversation. The bed where she'd cried in my arms about her aunt. The kitchen where she'd cooked for me while humming songs I'd never hear again without thinking of this moment. I packed my bags that night, not because I was running away, but because staying felt like drowning. Everything went into my suitcase with mechanical precision. Clothes I'd bought at the local market because she'd said they looked good on me. Books I'd been reading to have interesting things to talk about with her. Souvenirs I'd planned to bring home to show people the beautiful life I was building. All of it felt contaminated now, evidence of my own stupidity. I didn't attend the wedding. I couldn't bear the thought of watching her marry someone else with flowers I'd helped pay for. I left the resort the morning before, checked into a cheap inn in Batangas where nobody knew my name or my story. The room was small and dingy, with a broken air conditioner and stains on the walls, but it felt honest in a way my cottage never had. No pretense, no performance. Just what it was. I sent her one message before I turned my phone off. I hope you're happy. I really do. She read it. I could see the little scene notification pop up almost immediately, but she never replied. That was it. 2 months of what I'd thought was love ended with a read receipt and silence. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement that what we'd shared had meant anything at all. Just digital silence that felt louder than any words could have been. I spent 3 days in that inn, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how I'd gotten everything so wrong. Not just wrong, but completely backwards. I'd thought I was the destination when I was just a layover, a place to rest between flights to somewhere better. Someone more important. Someone who'd been chosen long before I'd ever walked into her life. The worst part wasn't that she'd lied to me. The worst part was that she'd told me exactly who she was from the beginning, and I'd chosen not to listen. It took everything in me not to message her again. Not to ask how the wedding went, or if she'd thought about me at all while she was saying vows to someone else. Not to demand explanations or closure, or some kind of acknowledgement that what we'd shared had been real, at least for me. But I finally understood something that had taken me 54 years to learn. Some people don't leave because they don't love you. They leave because they love someone else more. And sometimes, you're not even important enough to leave. Sometimes, you're just forgotten. A month later, I moved to a quieter island, Siquijor, a place where the internet was slow and the tourists were few and nobody cared about my story because everyone had their own. I rented a small house near the beach, close enough to hear the waves but far enough from the main road to avoid the noise of jeepneys and motorcycles. The house came furnished with mismatched furniture and a kitchen that barely worked, but it was mine in a way the resort cottage never had been. I started over. Not the romantic, dramatic kind of starting over where you burn everything down and rise from the ashes. The quiet kind, where you learn to cook for one again and remember what your own voice sounds like when you're not trying to impress anyone. I learned to make simple meals that satisfied me without needing to be special or impressive. Rice and vegetables, grilled fish from the local market, mangoes that I ate standing in my kitchen without cutting them into perfect slices. I don't date anymore. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The idea of trusting someone with my heart again feels impossible, like asking someone who's been in a car accident to get behind the wheel. I walk every morning while the fishermen bring in their nets, and I've started learning their names, their routines, their stories. Simple conversations about weather and catches and family, nothing deeper than the surface, but somehow more honest than anything I'd shared with Danalyn. I read books I should have read years ago, novels about men who make the same mistakes I made, who believe what they want to believe instead of what's in front of them. I write letters to my kids that I never send, trying to explain where I've been and what I've learned. I think about Danalyn sometimes, but not with anger. The anger burned out weeks ago, leaving behind something emptier but cleaner. A dull ache that reminds me I'm still alive, still capable of feeling something, even if that something hurts. She didn't ruin me. That's what I keep telling myself, and most days I believe it. She reminded me of something I'd forgotten during my marriage, during the divorce, during all those years of thinking love was something you had to earn or deserve or fight for. Love isn't something you can buy with medical bills or wedding expenses. It's not something you can beg for or bargain for or sacrifice yourself to obtain. It's either there or it isn't. And, if it isn't there, no amount of trying will make it appear. What I was looking for couldn't be found in the Philippines or anywhere else. Peace was never a place. It was inside me, buried under years of trying to be the man everyone else needed me to be instead of the man I actually was. I'd handed it away piece by piece to my ex-wife, to my job, to the idea that I could love someone enough to make them love me back. Danalyn was just the last person I'd given it to before I finally learned to keep it for myself. I still watch the sunsets from my porch. They're different here, more orange than gold, reflected in water instead of mountains. But they're beautiful in their own way, maybe more beautiful because I'm not trying to share them with someone who doesn't want to be there. Everything is peaceful when you stop fighting for attention from people who've already made their choices. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me, if she ever looks at her wedding photos and remembers the man who paid for her flowers, if she feels guilty or grateful or nothing at all. But mostly I try not to wonder. Her story is her story now. Mine is mine. And for the first time in years, I'm okay with that. I came here for peace. I found pain first, but maybe that's part of the journey. She taught me something, even if it hurt. I'll never again mistake attention for love, not even in paradise. Especially not in paradise, where everything looks beautiful from a distance but only reveals its true nature when you get close enough to touch.